everybody and welcome to a new video. Today got something very special for you and is a comparison of the SteelDive SD1953 against the iconic Rolex Submariner date. Now, just like Jody from Just One More Watch, I do now have myself a watch sugar daddy known as Mr. Z. Now, Mr. Z kindly loaned me his Submariner, and like I say, I wanted to do this video just to show you what $15,000 worth of dive watch looks like compared to that SteelDive SD1953. Now again, this is not a serious video in so much as the SteelDive is a better watch or anything like that. What I'm trying to show you is just how far you get on $100 versus something that currently retails for about $15,000. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the video, guys. If you do like the content, please do consider subscribing and liking. Thank you very much. Okay, so welcome to the video, guys. This is going to be a comparison of the SteelDive SD1953 against the Rolex Submariner. Now, what I've tried to do is look at each individual component on the watches together so that it's easier to, I suppose, digest this video. Anyway, I hope you enjoy. So looking at the steel being used, Rolex used 904L, whereas SteelDive used the industry standard 316L. The main differences are two parts. 904L will actually take a higher polish and therefore give the watch a bit more of a blingy finish. 316L though is actually the harder steel, so somewhat contrary belief, 904L does actually have less scratch resistance than 316. Both watches have a 41mm case. Finishing on the cases wasn't too far apart. Obviously, you would say that the Rolex has a better finish in terms of rounded corners, so on and so forth, but that's not to say that the SteelDive has what I would consider to be sharp or roughly finished casework at all. It doesn't. On the Rolex, you do have a sapphire crystal with an anti-reflective coating. Makes the visibility and legibility of this watch, very, very good. One thing I would say, though, is looking at this footage, you can see that crystal sits really quite low compared to the dial. So it is quite an aesthetically pleasing low profile, whereas the SteelDive SD1953, the gap between dial and crystal is a little bit higher. The SteelDive does have a sapphire crystal, but it doesn't have an anti-reflective coating, and as such does have a little bit more glare or less visibility. That's not to say that it's not a clear watch to read. It is. It's just that it doesn't have that anti-reflective coating, so it does have a little bit of a shine on it in bright sunlight. Turning our attention to the dials, on the Rolex you've got a printed logo and lettering both up at the top and at the bottom of the dial. The hands and the hour markers are actually white gold, so they do have a slightly higher level of luster than what you're going to find on the SD1953. Similar story there, it does have a printed dial, but the hour markers and the hands are made from stainless steel. Both watches have a Cyclops date window. Magnification on the Rolex sits at 2.5 times, whereas it is a little higher on the SteelDive. But this is a good example of where the anti-reflective coating and the quality of the crystal does make a difference. You can see the date window is much clearer on the Rolex as opposed to the SteelDive, even though the SteelDive does have a higher magnification. That's not to say the SteelDive is bad in any way, it is just less clear. 120 click unidirectional bezel. Bezel action on the Rolex is, as you would expect, very nice. You also have extremely good finishing with those teeth on the side of the bezel with the Rolex. And just for comparison purposes, here's what the bezel sounds like on the SteelDive. Looking at the bezel and the teeth engraving on the SteelDive, I was pleasantly surprised. It's actually really quite good finishing, as you can see in this macro footage. Moving on to the bezel inserts, the Rolex has a Cerachrom bezel insert that's got a lume pip at 12. As you would expect with Rolex, laser-like finishing on those engravings, and then it does have like a PVD platinum powdered effect inside those engravings, but very nice ceramic bezel. On the SteelDive, much the same, except it is filled with BGW9, and that's where the SteelDive, in my opinion, is actually better, because the lume on that bezel is fantastic, but again, it is also ceramic. Inside the Submariner, you've got the caliber 3235. That is a superlative chronometer, which essentially is an adjusted movement to have an accuracy of there or thereabouts, plus or minus 2 seconds a day, and a 70-hour power reserve. A very well finished movement, and something that is considered to be one of the best movements out there. On the other hand, the Seiko NH35A is what powers the SteelDive 1953. That's got a 41-hour power reserve, and accuracy there or thereabouts. So about 20 seconds a day, I'd say. The one thing though about the SteelDive is the NH35A, if that does have some sort of issue with it, it's very cheap to replace. So no servicing, you just swap the movement out. As these are both dive watches, waterproofing is of paramount importance. So to that end, both have 300 meters water resistance. The Rolex is protected by the triplock crown. As you can see there, very well finished crown, and then protected by those nice crown guards. Very much similar story with the SteelDive, because it is a homage. Same 300 meters water resistance and a very nicely finished screw down crown. Low light legibility on these watches, I would have to say that the SteelDive is better. Now on the Rolex they use Chromolite lume, and as you can see it's that nice blue sort of hue, but on the SteelDive we're using a BGW9, but that's not only on the dial but also on that bezel, so I think SteelDive, I have to give it to them on this one. Turning our attention to the bracelets, on the Rolex you've got that 904L steel oyster bracelet. You've got a very nice finished clasp there with the Rolex crown, and you do have a glide lock clasp allowing for, I suppose, fine tuning of the sizing, so it can be extremely comfortable to wear. The one thing I would say is you can tell the attention to detail on this bracelet. It is buttery smooth and the tolerances are extremely fine. It's a very, very well engineered bracelet. Now that's not to say that the SteelDive bracelet is poor by any stretch, it's just that the tolerances are a little looser on that. You can see there you do have that sort of push mechanism as opposed to the clip that you'll find on the Rolex, and you do have a micro adjustment, but still very nice bracelet, solid. But like I say, the tolerances are somewhat looser than what you'd find on the Rolex, which I think is forgivable. Pricing on the watches, well, as you would expect, there is a gulf of difference, $15,125 there or thereabouts. But to be realistic, you can't buy the Rolex at retail, it's waitlist only. Mr. Z, who lent me this watch, was actually on a waiting list for 2 years to get it, whereas the SteelDive, you can get it with 10-day delivery in whatever colour you want, whether that be the black bezel, green bezel, or the blue bezel. So there you have it, guys. That is the SteelDive SD1953 versus the Rolex Submariner date. So what do you think? Is it worth the $15,000? Or does the SteelDive not represent value for money at $125 Australian, there or thereabouts? Please be keen to hear what you guys think. Put your comments in the section below and I will come back to you. But other than that, thank you so much for watching the video. I'll see you in another one very soon. Take care.